And if you listen to me for any length of time, you realize I coach not being transactional. So if you run one campaign and there's results from that campaign and you pick up the phone and you get jobs and that's it'll track that very well. If you're doing brand building properly, the client should see you 8 or 10 times in different places. And so that "where did you hear about us" gets a little fuzzy. But I still implore you to ask for it and then write down what they say, because that's the thing that's top of mind. But know that they've seen you in 5 other places if you're doing your job. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the ServiceMonster podcast. My name is Joe Kowalski. I am your host. My co-host today is Adam from training, and we're going to be talking about drip campaigns in our feature focus today. But before we get to that, let's do some housekeeping with some ServiceMonster updates. Adam, what do we have?
Well, first off, I just want to say happy Pi Day out there for all you mathematicians, 314. Whether your preferred pie is of the pizza variety or of that dessert, hope you guys are celebrating accordingly.
Ba-dum-bum.
I also wanted to mention we had a hotfix that came out just earlier today, actually, a few hours ago, for our Responsibid users. There was an issue where the Google events, when they were being updated, were deleting rather than updating. And so Matt Anderson did a quick fix there, and hotfix is out. Also, there was a little project, I'll let you kind of go more in detail, but a little project that David's working on for those server issues that have been going on that we talked about a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, so we're hitting this on 3 fronts. So the first one is the actual current problem, which is this renegade process that's crashing a server. It's got a 5-minute window for hiccup, and then everything comes back online. So we've got monitoring on, and he's looking for that. We believe it to be an API user, that somebody learned them some coding and opened up a sheet and wrote a JavaScript to hammer our servers. And we have what we call throttling mechanisms in place to block things like denial of service, or what are typically called DNS attacks. But it must be under that threshold. But it just happens, just boom, like all of a sudden the server will receive a bunch of additional requests, and that will crash one of the servers, and then 5 minutes later it's all good. So we're going to put a couple things in place. I don't want to go too technical on that particular front, but we're going to squish that one. We'll contact the offending API requester if that does indeed to be the issue. It could be ServiceMonster too, right? It could be a client-side renegade process that just spins and then spams the service. So it could be our own learned them some code and coder dev team people, and we just missed it, and it occasionally happens. So we'll keep you guys updated there. But the next thing we are going to do is David is upgrading all of our servers. And so we have this mechanism where we push the code to a server, and then it replicates itself. And then as we need more servers, they can replicate themselves. It usually takes between 3 and 5 minutes to fire those things up, though, which is why the delay when one of the server crashes. So once it recognizes that we need some more horsepower, it can add it to the mix by adding one of the cloned machines. So he's updating the base clone. I think we're on SQL Server 2012, so that's fine, but the OS is on 08. So we can bring that up quite a bit. And the service that's running the web portion, which is called IIS, we can bump that up quite a bit too. I think we're running a version or 2 previous. So we're going to be doing some maintenance. Shouldn't affect you guys at all, but we're all in attempt to squish those times as much as possible. We also have turned on high-intensity logging. So any requests that take, I think we've got it set to over 2 seconds right now. Any requests that take over 2 seconds get logged in a special file that David could then go assign to an engineer to figure out what's taking so long. And it's usually a database query that we can tune or put some indexing on or something to make it much faster. So we're kind of focused firing on that. I told David that's his number 1 priority right now until those log file support are clear.
Very cool. All right, so I think, too, if we wanted to make just a quick update, why are we filming this on Thursday rather than Friday this week, Joe?
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot to talk about that. Because I will not be here tomorrow. My wife and I are attending another appointment for our would-be baby, our number 6, born in May. So, family first.
Family first is right. And so if anyone who was expecting that live stream, don't worry, we'll be back next Friday.
Yeah, the 4 people that will bug that had a question ready to go. We'll keep streaming it, though. 1 is greater than 0, right?
It's very true.
That's right.
So speaking of our loyal viewers, let's go ahead and transition here into SMUG. And Alan actually wrote this week wondering about the kind of the ServiceMonster show and how that was no longer, and how this is kind of like a amalgamation, as you say. And so I just wanted to say, first off, thank you, Alan, for the enjoyment of the show. Like, I do appreciate that a lot. And then second, if you just kind of want to explain the podcast, what this all kind of is, and how we're going to set this up to help alleviate that.
Yeah, I want to kind of probably do an actual podcast with Michael and bring him and have him sit as the co-host, where we talk about our kind of strategies across the board. But in a nutshell, the show is no more and the ask is no more. So the ask came to a point where we did 75 episodes over almost 2 years, a little over 2 years. Yeah, and it was consistent. It was there. We had plenty of viewers in the core demographic. But there's only so many topics that you can talk about before you start really repeating yourself. And I hate repeating myself. I mean, hate it. To the point where I wouldn't do any more shows and Justin couldn't drag me by my ear to the desk. So while we were kind of reformulating that, I was watching the show and it was like, it's okay, it's informative, but there's no real interest there. And we saw the viewership starting to wane and just people got uninterested in both those projects. And then something that we've seen come back now for its third life in a big way is podcasting. And so as a podcast, I think the format, it's great because it's more conversational and we can get deeper in our topics, right? We don't have to do that 7 to 10 minute format and then we can film it too. So you get the piece. But here's the thing. We kind of smush the shows together. So you get some Joe love in front of the camera, which is what Justin always wants. That's where he gets his fire. And then on top of that, you've got the show content, which is kind of the first 5 minutes, 10 minutes of the podcast. So here we are talking about SMUG, and at the end of the SMUG segment, kind of closes out what would be the show. Corny jokes and everything, Pi Day viewers.
Yep.
That's right. And so that was kind of the format. Then from that point forward, instead of me talking about a question that, in depth on business, we decided to start diving into our feature sets because there's just so much to ServiceMonster. We could talk about them for a long time. And we need this kind of base of why are these features important to business owners? It's not enough just to say, well, here's the button. You've got to come at it like, what's my goal? Okay, I'll figure out and kind of play with it. And then, if I have some hiccups or things I have to reimagine, that's fine as long as I'm hitting the goal. And so that's kind of the short version of that story.
Yep. And so just to kind of piggyback off of that, we're going to have timestamps and things like that for this, Alan. So if all you're interested in is that first kind of 5-10 minute segment, it'll be there. Listen to that. Hopefully you stick around for the whole thing, but you can get that kind of update at the beginning there.
Yeah, and now it's a podcast first format, right? Which means that instead of taking a YouTube video and then throwing it on as a podcast, and what the hell is he talking about? I can't see the visual that he's referring to. Here we're a little more in depth, and we know that audio is our first format. So, when we wink at the camera, it's only for that little extra layer of engagement, I guess you would say. Yeah.
All right. So the next thing actually came from one of our support staff, Brenda. She just wanted to let everyone know that there is an updated filter to a couple of her reports. So I just figured this would be a quick and easy way to shout out to her for her hard work and also just letting our users know. And so now there's 4 reports: income by date range, invoice totals by region, payments received, and order progress. All 4 of those reports you can now toggle between and filter residential and commercial.
Nice. We have some of that on the dashboards, but the reports were missing that until now.
So going from there, we had a post from Melissa a couple of days ago where she was asking about uploading pictures and documents to a site. And I know you replied to this already, but you just want to kind of explain your possible solution kind of now with the service items, and then also just kind of where that's going towards.
Yeah, so we first, way back when, upload was kind of an afterthought. It went against activities. And you can kind of tell, especially in 5, because you have to save the activity first and then go to the Uploads tab to upload the image. It's a little cleaner in 6, but it's still, you can put images against an account, but then how do you find them later? Where do they go? What context were they in? You can upload images directly against orders, and that's a better home, right? There's an image tab. You can peruse your images for the order and so forth. But you can also upload images from your technician, and can you do it in Mobile 3, or is it just technician?
You can in mobile, yes.
Okay. So you can upload images to service items. Now, if you don't know what service items are, they're items that you service within a site. So you have a site, which is the location or the property. Think of it as the residential home or the commercial property. And then you have service items, and these can be bedrooms or description of carpet or a piece of upholstery or an office or a conference room. You can keep dimensions so that if you're doing things that are based off the square foot, you can easily calculate those, clump them together. They'll total everything up for you. But you can also do things that are really highly effective later, which is identifying what services you've applied to what service items. So you'll know how often you've cleaned that conference room, how many times you've laid protectant, how many times you've done the deep clean versus the, bonnet cleaning, whatever. So they're highly effective. They get, especially in the residential market, they really have a propensity to build your average invoice higher, because you can convince Mrs. Jones that you haven't taken care of that front room in a while and you need to go hit that before things start crawling out of the carpet.
Well, hopefully it's not getting to that point, but yes.
So images against sites directly, I think it's a good idea. We kind of technically have it against the service item since the service item is linked to the site, but we haven't given it the same love images has on orders, which we should definitely do. And to that end, right now, we don't charge you guys any extra for data storage. We just kind of let you do it. For the most part, most people don't store huge amounts of data. The pictures get sizable. There's some people who do videos, which I was surprised by. But for the most part, it's not too bad. I want to put things in the marketplace, though, which will allow you to use something like Google Drive, right, or Bing Storage, or whatever your flavor is, and then use that as your file service, because we have it developed in a way that you can pull those files from so many different places within the code on the fly. So it wouldn't be too difficult, and then we can give you extra storage that way. So that's kind of the long-term picture of pictures.
Yep, very cool. So as always, thank you to our SMUG users for their collaboration and for all that they do on that end. And with that, I think we're ready for our next big event. And I think you wanted to kind of set up here just that little kind of segue.
Yeah, so the feature focus segment. So piggybacking on what we did last week, we kind of talked about FillMySchedule, right? The importance of a direct mail program and client retention. You could see it as a pitch if you wanted to, but we really broke down how that whole program works, the copy, the intent, the time periods that you should be targeting. If we carry that over to this podcast, you can use the ServiceMonster drip campaigns to do the FillMySchedule 8-step program. And you can either do it as an email program or a direct mail program, which is pretty cool. So we want to kind of dive into drip campaigns, why you want to use them, why you care about them, what you could run into if you're not doing them correctly, some of the best practices that you should do when you're setting them up, and then we'll hand you over to different places where you can get training to figure out how to set up your own drip campaigns.
And so for anyone who's wondering what drip campaign means, we're talking about automation. Automation on the marketing front, and those emails and so on that we send out, we set up to send out certain times, and they're ready to go. So, Joe, why do we care about marketing automation?
Well, let me start with horsepower. So when you're single owner operator, you get 50 or 60, maybe 70 hours a week if you want to keep a marriage together. You learn very quickly how to do work when you're not at work, right, in your brain, and then you just come to work and implement some of the changes to your business. Those are the best places to work on your business as opposed to, just pushing the wand. I learned a long time ago, though, if I get 5 amazing employees, that's an additional 200 hours a week of horsepower. Like, my extra 10 or 20 hours is insignificant. It's a 10x on the extra time I'm burning, right? Automation is like hiring employees without the freaking payroll. And I say that surrounded by employees. So, but the deal is with marketing automation, some of the tasks that were typically given to the office workers to make sure that certain things were getting done in terms of client retention can be set up in such a way where it's just done automatically. You can set up the FillMySchedule email campaign to drip out to people based off their last invoice date and hit them a week later, hit them a month later, then 3 months, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 24. You can just keep going too. And each one of those will have a special kind of content that they get delivered. And once you set it up, it's done. That's it. You'll never have to touch it. You want some things in place so you know that things are still working once in a while. And we'll talk about that. But automating it, it's like a brand new employee that works 24/7 that is responsible for sending out communications to your clients. So automation is a big deal because you don't have time to wear every single flipping hat all the time and remember every little detail. Like I get it, I know. So that's why I like it, because once you set it up, it just kind of runs on its own. Now, not to take away any delusions or anything, you can set up an automated direct mail campaign too. And if you want them to get to the home by pushing a button, that program's called FillMySchedule. But if you want the campaign to run automatically so that you can print out your labels and letters and then stuff your envelopes yourself, you would use the drip campaigns to do that. And then you would be prompted with the email of all the materials that you need once those run to go print and stamp and seal and ship those out. So marketing automation is going to help you stay on top of your client retention programs, and they can help you with your prospecting campaigns too, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
So you mentioned email, you mentioned the mail campaigns. Do you want to touch a little bit too on the kind of call list, maybe kind of keeping track of just that activity reminder too? Yeah,
so we have multiple kinds of campaigns, right? Call and export were the other two because there's 4. There's also, if you're in the marketing campaigns, there's also lead source. So there's technically 5 campaign types, putting that in air quotes. And that's 4 of them do work, and 1 of them is just to record the fact that you had flyers printed, or that you hung door hangers, or that you did a Yellow Page ad. You don't really do anything, right? The system, you're not asking the system to produce an output. You're just letting it know I did this marketing campaign. So you can track how much you spend, your ROI, and all that stuff. The other 4 campaigns, the email campaign, that's obvious. Direct mail campaign for letters and labels, pretty cool. It lets you start your label wherever you want, so you don't end up with a million half sheets, right? And then, and you have your export campaign for use with third-party vendors. Maybe you want to upload that list to somebody else. Fax campaign, if anybody does those anymore. Whatever. Somebody else email.
What's a fax?
Yeah, people used to market via fax. Crazy. And then the call campaign, which is one of the favorites, because it generates a series of activities that are, hey, go call these people, and then you can use your activity panel that we talked about to process those calls quickly and easy. So you're going to go to your activity list, upper right-hand corner, there's an activities panel button, hit that, and that'll allow you to really fly through those calls, track your progress, all that kind of stuff. So those are the 4 campaign types, and you can automate all of those. So you can have them in the drip as events and outputs that happen.
So we've already kind of mentioned the client retention side of things, the FMS 8-step program and similar. What are some other common use cases? What are some campaigns people can build that are actually going to help them?
Yeah, so you've got it's easiest to target your current clients because you already have the data. And so you can do things like the 8-step we talked about. You can do a thank you, right, post-job. You can push different products and services, right? If you get something new, let's say you add air duct cleaning, you can go after that. You can even use these filters. You can get pretty crazy targeting clients who, let's say, have pets and do a pet special. You can get really crazy if you're tracking whether they have pets and maybe one of the animal's names, one of the pet names. You can address the output, the envelope, or the letter to the pet's name, which is kind of cool. Dear Sparky, not everything you do does your owner think is cute, right? You want to talk about an increased response rate. Try addressing the letters to their pet to the pets.
Oh yeah, no, pet owners love that kind of cute stuff. It's ridiculous.
That's right. And here's a mini sweater for your Chihuahua. That's right. Another good example, obviously, the whole other side of the coin of prospecting. And so you can buy, let's say, a list from InfoUSA. And if we want to talk about data sources, I guess maybe we can deep dive into that in another day. But I would suggest InfoUSA. It's going to have the best data. And upload that into ServiceMonster through our accounts upload utility. Then you can target those clients in your marketing or those prospects in your marketing campaigns. And assuming you picked up email addresses, send them out an email. If not, maybe generate a call campaign, an export campaign, or a direct mail campaign. So it's very effective for multiple uses. You can target zip code area. You can do. There's just so many. There's so many filters. Don't get overwhelmed by that, though, guys. There's only a handful that you're really going to focus on. Last invoice date is a big one. Maybe invoice amount if you want to only send something out to people who spent more than $200 last invoice. So different ways to use it, but very, very comprehensive.
There's another one that people ask about, a surprisingly large amount actually, and kind of that newsletter, just kind of a branding, kind of current event kind of scenario, similar to like with our updates on the show. And I remember, when we were talking about the build your brand, as far as like the book there, and setting yourself up as the expert. You don't always have to necessarily be selling someone to still be selling yourselves to them, right?
Right.
And so this newsletter thing is a great way you can have that as long as you update the content. You just have that running at set times. Let them know we've got new things. Here's what I do. Here's some tips and tricks, things like that.
Content is king in that process, though, right? Because the way I would set that up is just everybody who has a freaking email address in your database. You want to be, unless they say, don't send me stuff again, which, again, ServiceMonster will put on the bottom, right? A little unsubscribe, which we then, feed back. So they won't, once they unsubscribe, they won't be sent that again, even if they aren't necessarily marked that in our system. And then you can mark them in our system to your heart's content. Make sure your rules are filters are there for do not email. But that would be it. And then the content that you'd have to produce, I'd make sure you're producing, unless you get on a rhythm like we do here, because we have people dedicated to creating content, then I would suggest queuing it up, like creating content like 6 months ahead of time, and then just staying ahead of that schedule. And then those emails can go out once a month to your entire base. So, yeah, another good use of a drip campaign. Although you could just do it, right? You could set up the campaign and then just click run.
Yep.
And then just do it. So,
and I think you just kind of touched on that. And so it's a perfect kind of segue into some of the dangers of automation. And you already kind of touched on the do not contact. So let's kind of go more in depth on that, just avoiding spam in general. And then some of those dangers of automation, like you said, staying ahead of the content drip. So,
yeah, spam's getting more and more. It has for the last 10 years. We've been watching this evolution of the tightening of spam. Not only are email companies applying filters to keep emails with certain keywords out or from bad acting domains, but they're also very strict on some of the key elements. Like number one, you can't email people if you hadn't obtained the email legitimately, like they didn't give it to you. If you screen scraped it, which we used to do in 04, no longer allowed. Can't do it. Okay, cool. You can communicate, call, or email anybody you've done business with, and the last time I looked at the stat, it was like within 6 months. And if they owe you money, then all bets are off, right? Collections have their own set of rules when somebody owes you money. But if you adhere to that, in addition to you've got to have your address at the bottom of the invoice, or bottom of the email, which we encourage you to put that info in there, then you're going to be adhering to those spam laws. But just buying email lists and then sending out emails for solicitation, that's going to get you in trouble. Or that's going to get the pipeline in trouble, like the global SMTP ServiceMonster email pipeline. And then we got to go chase it out, shut you down, explain to the authority that, we have a global kind of everybody uses it type of a thing. And then encourage you guys to get on your own SMTP services, like through Google, which is free, as long as you're not sending out more than 500 a day, I think.
Yeah, usually it's about 500.
Yeah.
And so that do not contact the unsubscribe is another big one that kind of ties in from the flip side, from like the customer's point of view. Because if you get spam, like you're actually legally required to allow them to unsubscribe.
Yeah.
And so just kind of touch on that really quick on ServiceMonster's side with our server or with their own.
Yeah, I mean, with your own, you just got to make sure you're applying that. With ours, I think our SMTP service is what applies the unsubscribe portion of the functionality.
Yeah, the unsubscribe is there by default. If you use your own, we have a link you can set up that'll kind of bounce back to you.
Oh, right. So, yeah.
So you mentioned, I don't know, 5 minutes ago at this point, some fail-safe and some things you can do there. So another kind of danger is making sure that your content is being received, that you don't have formatting errors or things like that.
Right. So I strongly suggest you testing, any piece of content, any new piece of content through the test pipeline, making sure that you receive the email yourself and you got your eyeballs on it and it looks good. I would suggest that you have yourself in your database as a customer or an account, and that you at least are in the drip campaigns you want to monitor, and triggering those ahead of time to kind of make sure everything looks the way you want it to makes my heart sink. When you send something out, and we did it early in the days using early tools like Excel to mash together a message, mail merge message, and then send out 1,000 emails. And I'm 500 deep to find out that one of my mail merge tags didn't merge.
Oh, no.
And so it's like bracket, dear sir, bracket, or bracket, first name bracket. We've all received those, right? Because everybody early in their marketing days make those types of mistakes. So you want to make sure that there's nothing like that in there, because it's hard to send out another one. Now, I will say this. Joe Polish used to use a double email technique where he'd intentionally put some sort of false flag information in the first email and then follow it up with one like 10 or 15 minutes later. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, or I made a mistake, or, whatever the excuse is to hit you twice and make it seem like there's a sense of urgency because they did something wrong or let out too much information. I've seen that tactic used. It's kind of shitty, but
oh yeah, no, that see that in the dating world sometimes too.
I wouldn't know. So making sure you're in those lists, you're reviewing those content, all that content on a regular basis. I think that's critical, because you can let it automate and it'll automate wrong. And the next thing you know, you get a call from Mrs. Jones and she's like, you know what? For the past 7 days, every day in a row, you've sent me the same email. Will you please stop? And you can actually start to piss people off through this being too automated, right? Sending out too many emails, too much communication. It's about value content. If you're sending out stuff that they find valuable, that they find interesting or educational or inspiring, or you've persuaded them somehow. If you send out good content, they'll be lenient with you. But if you're not sending out great content, it's all ads and, look what I can do, and it's all about you, and you send that and you make a mistake, oh man, there's hell to pay. So you got to be paying attention when you automate things. Yes, you don't need the employee anymore, but man, once a week or once a month, you should be checking to make sure everything's working the way you expect it to.
They have to change that oil sometimes, right?
I wouldn't know about that either. I'm so bad at changing my oil. Holy crap. Had to go there, huh?
Yeah, I didn't realize. But when the oil light comes on, that's usually when it's a little bit too
Time
late.
to pour some oil in it and keep going.
Yeah.
That's what you do in the Hondas.
Oh, my goodness. So just from kind of like a training standpoint, I just kind of wanted to go through a couple of really common questions, kind of just go back and forth, like how do I track my campaigns? So we have, a report. It's literally built around your campaigns. You can see they've come in, and this is all based on the lead source side, which gets maybe a little bit confusing, but you already mentioned, outside campaigns versus the ones within ServiceMonster.
Yeah. So let's just touch on this real quick.
Okay.
So all of these campaigns, whether you set them up through Drip or you just go into the marketing section, you set up a email, export, direct mail, or call campaign, or a lead source. They're all available to select as a lead source on your work orders and accounts. And if you don't know why they're both there, pay attention to another podcast. We'll deep dive into that too. We're one of the only companies who does it, and it's really, really necessary for effectively tracking lead sources for repeat business. So you're just not marking clients as repeat like we get imports from everywhere, right? It's always repeat. So what was I talking about?
Just talking about the campaign results. And
so lead source. So setting the lead source on accounts and work orders, you can set it to any one of those campaign types that you've created, whether you've created them through Drip or not. So then having that, you can tie into ROI, effectiveness, those kinds of things. So there you go.
And so, with that one report, you can literally see how effective your campaign is, and you can also see literally every transaction this runs, no matter how you set it up. It can run daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, every 10 years, whatever you want it to be. And, you can track every transaction that happens. And so you can do that on the actual campaign that you build. So if you're worried about seeing that, all of that information is tracked. It's all at the tip of your fingertips. Yeah,
it's incredibly easy to track how well and effective your campaigns are doing if you're transactional. And if you listen to me for any length of time, you realize I coach not being transactional. So if you run one campaign and there's results from that campaign and you pick up the phone and you get jobs and that's it'll track that very well. If you're doing brand building properly, the client should see you 8 or 10 times in different places. And so that where did you hear about us gets a little fuzzy. But I still implore you to ask for it and then write down what they say, because that's the thing that's top of mind. But know that they've seen you in 5 other places if you're doing your job.
Yeah, just really think about some of like the really, successful brands out there. There's a reason why Coke still runs ads every 2 minutes, I swear, or like why there's car commercials every single football game, right? It's because everyone knows who Coke is, but they're still getting out there in front of them, just everywhere you can see it.
That's right.
And then really, I think the big kind of crux of this and the biggest hurdle people have is the filters themselves. So there's so many of them, how to break them down, and I think you said it best earlier. Listen, there's a huge filter list. They're for very specific things, but you're going to be able to focus on a few of these main ones that are going to solve your initial kind of filtering out, and then as you get more of an expert, you can kind of dive in. And so I always say when I'm training, ask, who am I trying to target? Just ask yourself that. Who do I want to receive this? Is it literally every prospect? Or is it, based on a certain service type? Is it based on a certain area, a city, a zip code? Whatever that
length
might be.
From last service.
How long have they, maybe an average invoice like you mentioned.
Right.
And so you ask that first, then kind of work back from there. And those filters will make sense the second you ask that. Then we're asking the time period, That's where that invoice date, acquisition date, estimate date, things like that start to come into play, because we're trying to just figure out how long has it been since we did this.
Well, that's interesting too, because you have date, which is length of time from a specific event that's variable in the database, but then you also have date based off variable, right? Because you can literally track their birth date and then create a campaign to send them an email on their birthday.
Yep.
Right. So that's that win. In that case, their win, what we call a predicate, their win predicate is going to be based off the date that the services ran compared to the birth date that you've recorded.
And that's really when you start to see some of the power of what you can do just from custom fields and just regular tracking in the system. So, and then the flip side of the date question is, how often should I be checking to send these? Like FMS, they'll send it out just like a monthly batch, right? Just everyone in a certain time period. And it's really going to kind of depend on what is being sent. A thank you, you don't want to wait for a month to go by and then, all right, everyone who's had the thank you, blast them all the month later. You want to thank them pretty soon after the work's done. So you have those, they can check every single day. The system can literally set it up so the system will send every day.
And it's depending on your workload too, right? So if you don't, let's say you set up a calendar where you're like, Mondays are my in-office days. Like I don't schedule cleaning. I just, I do cleaning Tuesday through Saturday, let's say, and on Monday, that's just my office day. So you can set those up to run early in the morning on Mondays. And if there's work associated with it, like printing and stuffing and so forth, they'd be ready for you to go on that Monday, and then you can batch them together. So it's that kind of that game, like how soon can I get it to them? What's the effectiveness of getting it to them sooner rather than later? And then what's my workflow look like so that I can batch together the process? That's why we do, for FillMySchedule, weekly thank yous, because it's relatively sensitive. We want to get them out quickly. But then the reminders are all monthly because we want to batch together as much as we can because it reduces the cost. Just as simple as that. So playing with those dates and kind of figuring out what do you want to be responsible for handling and knowing what goes when. I'll tell you what, you do it weekly as opposed to monthly, and you'll send out a fourth every time. And so when a screw-up happens, which occasionally will, you forget a phone number or something, then it's a very small, much smaller group of people that were affected. So that's another case for keeping the batches small.
It's also a case, too, like you mentioned with the kind of your workflow. If you set up a call list and it's running like a 3-month list versus, like a biweekly, you're going to walk in that day and you're going to have a whole lot of activities.
Yeah, 250 calls. Oh, crap. It's going to take me a week to get through these.
Oh, my goodness. So, yeah, I think really if you start with those simple filters, I mean, we can't really, it's like you said, it's a podcast, so we're not going to put up a visual and walk through the whole process.
Yeah, well, this isn't a training video.
But we have a lot of these things set up.
We do.
To help you guys be able to use this. So if you're interested, let's just kind of go through all of these things. We have our webinar website. We literally have webinars strictly for marketing.
And you talk about drip campaigns.
Yep. Drip campaigns, the filter process.
Get on that marketing webinar, guys.
We have help videos that are kind of shorter. They're more targeted to specific things.
Still with Stephanie, yes?
Yep, with Stephanie. And we have our wonderful support staff here. If you call in with a quick question, maybe you want them to double check your filters.
Call, chat, email, whatever your flavor.
And we have an article that goes over all of these filters, and we'll actually attach this here on the video link. But just you can understand those filters. Our whole help site has that on there. And so understanding the filters will help you be more successful.
I think once you remove that initial fog of war and you kind of get it, that like you said, natural English questions to yourself. Who am I trying to target? Write that down, and then match that up with the filters. And you'll forget stuff too, like you should be looking at do not email or do not call if you're creating a call list or an email list. Maybe you want to, if you're doing a direct mail list, you want to make sure you have a zip code in a city at least so the damn thing's mailable, right? So little things like that you'll learn over time. But as long as you're not duplicating the list and sending out duplicate content, you really can't go wrong, right? Otherwise, your content's messed up. That's a big thing. I get that. But as far as like making sure things are going out or when to send them or how to filter, I think you'll be okay if you just start playing with it. And then once that fog of war clears, then you can start actually, wake up in the middle of the night like, oh, I could totally send out. Enter crazy campaign type here.
Yeah, we actually had a nice email from Dawn 6 weeks ago now, where that's exactly what was happening. She would wake up and another idea would pop up, and she was just so excited to get to work because she actually really just wanted to try something new.
And could implement it. Yeah, see what happens. All right.
That's everything I've got, Joe.
Well, thanks so much for joining us and your attention. Join us on Fridays on Facebook at 3 o'clock for a live stream, minus today, of course. You can see us on YouTube and all the different podcast platforms. We would encourage you to follow us on Instagram and Facebook. And until next time, be safe.
Happy Friday, everyone. See you next week.